professor at the Faculty of Information at the University of Toronto. I don't know why I feel compelled to say this, but I do. I'm also an amateur actor, and I'm in a production of Macbeth, and that's why I have this beard that I can't stand on my face. So see me without it. Lennox, you know. Hello. I walk in and say, you know, nothing. I move the plot along as necessary. Anyway, so as an academic, I have not been studying quantified self for a long time, but I have been studying surveillance for a long time. And by surveillance, many people think of surveillance as visual surveillance, as cameras tracking you through the streets. But when I speak of surveillance, I mean a very specific process of quantification and statistical analysis, where individuals are individuated and identified, so that all these persons or entities are given a unique identifier, tracked for some reason, and in some way, the data that is produced by that monitoring is accumulated, agglomerated, and analyzed. So, and this is a really important part of it, that you have a lot of data across a population that is analyzed for patterns and new knowledge, and then that knowledge is applied back to individuals within the population, or somehow that knowledge is applied back to the system, either to particular individuals or to change the system itself. Okay. Now, I'm sorry. I can sometimes press go and keep going. Okay. All right. What has been interesting to me through all of this is how surveillance is usually employed as a method of control at a distance. It's to manage populations, either to organize and rationalize consumer behavior by classifying people into certain market niches and making those niches more real in some way, or to very early, throughout the Industrial Revolution, recording the movements of workers, and so analyzing the movements of workers in order to produce machines to extract that knowledge from individuals. So surveillance often has this negative valence to it, or the word has a negative valence to it, and it certainly is usually used to manage large populations. What I've been very interested in for the past several years is how people can use surveillance, how to sort of democratize this mode of knowledge production, how to democratize infrastructures of surveillance, that is, ways of individuating, ways of tracking, ways of analyzing across populations, so that the types, is it possible that we can have this knowledge be more democratic, be useful for other things other than organizing capital in the nation state. So that's been my project. And I've been looking for ways this has been happening, and there's been actually a lot of research on people playing with camera surveillance. People playing to the cameras, using cameras to shoot back at the police. So this sort of camera surveillance as a political tool has been that's been quite active, both in political activity and in research about political activity. But it's very hard to figure out how people can or do use this kind of actuarial surveillance, this sort of quantification surveillance, to really engage in systems of power, oppositional. And again, pardon my academies, but this is kind of how I start speaking when I get going. But I encourage you to slap me down. So, one of my grad students said, go to Quantified Self. And this is why we have grad students too. Keep us on the ball. It tells what the fuck is going on. Anyway, so I did. And so I have not been studying Quantified Self for a long time. And really the only thing I have done with Quantified Self is go to the national conference back in May? May. In Mountain View, and do some interviews either by Skype or in person afterward, and just sort of organize my thoughts around this. So really all I'm presenting here is sort of my thoughts about what I've seen from this sort of political perspective that I bring to it. Who's all at in Mountain View, other than cool? All right, so you can correct my misapprehensions if you I invite that. So what I did, because I see surveillance through this particular lens, when I went to the conference, what I was looking at was the talks, was the posters, was the presentations about certain things. What kind of devices were, how was data being collected? What was actually producing data? How are people using things to produce data? How is data being collected? So that was how data was being produced. How was data being collected? Where were the repositories of data? How are people managing these large quantities of data? How is the data being analyzed? Or made sense of? Who is making sense of the data? How are people making sense of the data? And to me, the question of why was terribly important. I mean, for me, that is the central question. Why? Why are you doing this? What's the goal? You know, what do you want out of this? And I was also looking at what kind of institutions were there. Who was organized? How was this process of self-quantification being articulated, and again, this is my academies, but being articulated within larger structures of power? What sort of corporations were there? What sort of, how were people trying to make it an everyday accessible practice, all right? What kind of market models were people suggesting to make this a relatively stable practice? So that's what I went for. And that's what I sort of talk to people about as in the interviews afterward. Again, I want to really repeat that caveat that my understanding of the quantified self is about as shallow as you can get. My understanding of surveillance is not. I actually have I'm actually pretty good at that. But really, I went to the conference. I talked to people. You know a shitload more about quantified self than I do. So, what did I find? What was interesting to me? And let me talk about. I'm leaving aside stuff that I'm sure you're familiar with already. What kind of devices people use, you know, who was there. I mean, it was. So I'll just sort of get into a little bit about how I read the way it was being institutionalized. Okay, who was interested in this and what were they doing about it? And I did see two different models of institutionalization. There was this hacking thing going on, and there was this market model thing going on. You know, there was an attempt to, on one hand, there was this sort of individual, informal, not even really, so far as I could tell, community-based, but peer-based anyway, sort of, you know, we're just going to get together and have fun with this. We're going to hack our Zio, we're going to see what we can get by hacking our Zio, and we're going to present to each other what we got by hacking our Zio. On the other hand, there was Zio. There was actually Zio there, and there was Live Aid there, and there was, although it wasn't really announced, there was Asmapolis, representatives of Asmapolis were there, although they didn't present, they weren't all that evident. So I just want to sort of mark these three things as three different emergent market models, three different models that various institutions are trying to make work for their own benefit. One is the sort of ZEO model, which is basically you sell people, you give away the razor and you sell the blades. Okay, basically you you sell relatively cheaply the. Everybody know what ZEO is? I'm sorry, I'm assuming too much here. It's a EEG.
It's an EEG headband.
Yeah, it's an EEG headband, and so it records your brain patterns while you sleep. Generally, at least that's what people were generally talking about. How it was used. But I imagine you could use it when you're awake too. So it records your EEG patterns when you're awake and uploads them to ZEO.com, I assume. It's like a Fitbit, it's like any of these other machines that take some kind of biometric and upload them to a central repository. And what they're really selling, how they want to make the money is on the subscription service of you continuing to engage with the data that you put up there. Okay, just like Fitbit, just like well, I'll just leave it there before I talk about more that I know about. So that's one model. What they're offering people is the opportunity to engage with their data, and perhaps the data of their friends. All right. Then you have this other market model, which is Limeade. How many of you are familiar with Limeade? It is a company that actually sells their services to employers, and what it offers to employers is a chance for the employers to offer to their employees this kind of wellness monitoring. Okay, it allows employers to offer employees wellness monitoring. And this is the same kind of monitoring that I assume you're all more or less familiar with. But the market model, the model that they're using is the reason that employers want to hire Limeade is so that their employees will take responsibility for their wellness upon themselves and reduce the employees' responsibility for their insurance. Okay, lower their insurance costs, lower the healthcare costs of the employer. I found this really interesting. I found this very, very, very interesting. The other kind of model that was going on was just sort of direct. How many of you are familiar with asthmapolis? It's a asthma inhaler with some kind of radio transmitter. I don't quite know exactly. I would call it an ARFID chip, but I'm not sure that's actually right. So that it's an asthma inhaler where when you use it, when you press it, it will report its location to asthmapolis.somebody or another. All right. So in a way, it's kind of using the techniques of some of the techniques of quantified self, in that it's sort of this automatic generation, but it takes the data. It just basically takes the data and uses it elsewhere. Now, right. In terms of so those are the kind of institutionalization that's going on. What I found really interesting, that this was one of the things I found interesting, was that this kind of institutionalization was going on really kind of under the, it wasn't that visible. It wasn't that visible. That wasn't clearly the intent of the conference. The types of things that were really presented at the conference were things that I assume you're familiar with, the sort of things that are presented here. What was presented was that kind of hackery kind of, this is what I did to myself and I want to tell you about what I did to myself. And I found that the kind of things that people did that way, though, I found them actually quite I'll just, let me put it this way. I have a problem with wellness, right? I have a problem with wellness as a goal. I found that most of the objectives that people had, most of the improvement that people were intending to attain was basically about them being a better employee. It was basically about more or less. I mean, it was more or less, fitting in well with the being a responsible individual contract worker. Okay, so where you have your own health, your own sense of your abilities, this sort of self-controlled entrepreneurial self that you could deploy in this particular economic environment of Silicon Valley, but also, the high-tech industry throughout North America. That was one thing I found about the types of presentations that were there. The other sort of sense of the presentations that I had was that people didn't know how to deal with statistics. I mean, a lot of times they had a lot of data. That if I were to point out sort of directions for research, and I can only point them out because people pointed them out to me, it would be how to deal with sense making, how to deal with visualization of data, how to deal with all kinds, just how do I have all this data now, how do I engage it? And also how to deal with large data sets, even not even in a sense-making way, but just in a management way. How to sort of how to do the. Sorry, this is right. I want to make sure I say this right. How to do open street maps. Okay, how to deal with a kind of open access, open sourced, crowdsourced data repository that deals with personal information, the way that OpenStreetMaps is an open access data repository for geographic information. And so far as I can tell, no one knew how to do that. And I think that's related to another issue, was that people rarely related their data to populations. People rarely use their data to relate or to consciously relate to communities or populations at large. It was just sort of assumed that, or it wasn't even. It was like it was in relation to oneself. Maybe sometimes in relation to a small group of friends, where you have a competition between yourself and a group of friends. That is how how people understood themselves in relation to others. It was either sort of not at all, or within this small group of friends. When you had people dealing with larger populations, larger social issues, there was a not insignificant amount of work being done on citizen science. I think that the medical community is hooey, and so I'm going to eat a pound of butter every day and show you. I will show them that a pound of butter is good for me, right? However, a pound of butter might be for anybody else. For me, a pound of butter is a good thing. And so, or because I can't get access to parasitic worms, I'm gonna within legitimate medical research, I'm gonna get my bootleg parasitic worms. I'm gonna eat these parasitic worms, and I'm gonna show how these parasitic worms affected me and my Crohn's disease. So there was some of that sort of pushback against hegemonic knowledge. Again, it tended to be very wellness and health related. The only, in sort of contrary to that, there was one poster that really struck me because it was anomalous. It was a gay man who had, over the past year, chronicled, he had chronicled all of his sexual encounters, and he had mapped them on a map of San Francisco. And it said, you know, the text said, across the U.S., fewer than 5% of adults report more than one sexual partner a year. In San Francisco, over 50% of gay men report more than 10 sexual partners a year. So that was one of the only things that put the self, you know, that really placed the self in terms of this larger world, okay? And said very specifically, why I am doing this is to make note of myself and to show you myself with political intent. I was also surprised that very little of it was about sexuality. Very little of it was about sexuality. The types of wellness that were being spoken of were very, am I exercising? You know, how am I eating? How am I sleeping? I was frankly astonished at how many people had trouble sleeping. I was amazed at the problem of sleep. So anyway, so that's kind of, you know, one of the things I saw. Some things that I thought were real. Another thing that I thought was really very interesting was mostly in speaking in the interviews, not at the conference itself. I don't know what to make of this. But the importance of the meetups, because for a process of knowledge production that relies so much on quantification, and sort of a numeric analysis, that this sort of talking through face to face seems so central to the process. It's inseparable from the process of the numeric analysis. That people have to talk to each other about how they make sense of the numbers. I don't know quite what to do with that, but it seems really interesting. It seems really interesting to me. Let me see if I got anything else here. So, I actually don't think so. Now I should sort of back up, maybe a caveat I should have given before, but it's obvious by now. I'm kind of a pessimist. And I really, what I usually see in the world is subcultures or you know, emergent oppositional expressions just being co-opted and being integrated into, you know, the march of capital, blah 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 blah, and multinationals taking over everything, so I was looking. I am predisposed to see that. All right, I am predisposed to see the way that that subcultural activities are being co-opted. I can be all 60s about it, but that are being integrated into dominant structures of money. And I certainly see that in quantified self. At least, I at least see clear as day that healthcare, that this nexus of healthcare providers, employees, health insurance companies, they are really, 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 really interested in this. And if I have my say correctly, the way that they really want to be interested in this is to offload costs of healthcare onto you and make you responsible for your own health, so that this idea of social, you know, social welfare of a healthy population is no longer there, you know, is not what they have to do anymore. There's something about the culture, at least of the people who are there, the people who were there at this conference, people actually were quantified selfers. I mean, what a surprise that the people in quantified self are actually self-oriented. But I was a little bit surprised at the at a real lack, a real almost purposeful ignoring of questions of politics and power. And I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that's a good thing. I just can't imagine it. So here I am, talk.
Yeah, I would like to respond to that too, because the thing I saw in Quantified Self, even at the early meetups, is precisely the thing you saw, which is there's this divide between this like fervent of hacking and people interested in self-quantifying and doing it for their own ends. And then there's a bunch of other people who just see big dollar signs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they see this like this ferment and they're like, all right, I can write an iPhone app and I can make millions.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the Bay Area Quantified Self meetups that I went to, there were really two types of presenters. There was the first type, the hacker dudes like me, and then there was the second type of like some lady who would get up there and talk about her little 3-person startup that's making an iPhone app, and they're going to come up with some device that does a thingamabobber, right? And there was always this tension in the meetups themselves, in the same way that you saw at the conference. And at the conference, I do agree that like the commercial stuff was kind of like going underground, right? Where the hacker stuff was on the top. But I think that it's possible that's just a reflection of the whole way that the Bay Area is. There's always this entrepreneurial zeal to like seize on something and make it the next billion-dollar company, right? And to the extent that Quantified Self has emerged out of Bay Area culture, it's carrying that with it everywhere, right? Did you see that too, or?
Well, I was, see too, I look at maybe a little differently than maybe you guys do. Like, I see corporations and stuff trying to take advantage of the data to make money, but I also see just much millions of people trying to fight back against corporations, trying to, you know, sort of ruin their lives too, right?
Where did you see that?
Well, just, I mean, okay, for healthcare type of information, I think a lot of people turn to technology out of frustration. They're not getting help from the institutions, right? So like anything, any edge, any tool they could find to help them, you know, they're using that to keep healthy, right?
And that kind of actual what can I call it? Oppositional hacking, you know, the hacking that's actually political, and this is mine, not yours. That really has a sense of, you know, not just fun hacking, but fuck you.
The one I remember that was really fuck you hacking was the one with the pacemaker, Kyle. He was hacking into pacemakers to get data about hearts back out of it, because it keeps all the data for the manufacturer, which is so wrong. So Kyle, you know, Kyle Matroulis, he's I don't know if he's done it, but he's organizing at least hacking the Zio. So the Zio doesn't just, you know, you can actually get your own data from the Zio, and you don't have to send it to Zio.com. Hacking Fitbit and hacking pacemakers. But I really think one of the things that is interesting that the hacking is at the level of devices. Hacking is at the level of devices, and there isn't a lot of hacking at the level of aggregation and analysis. I don't know how to do that, and that's one of the problems I think is that's relative. Yeah, right now it's all being done in silos by the companies that make the devices, because at least then they have hundreds of devices and they collect lots of data and do it easily, and they know kind of what to expect, right? Whereas when you're doing it yourself, like especially if you're trying to unify the data from your Zio and from your Fitbit and learn something, like man. You're in the jungle out there, dude.
Do you know who was it Alex or somebody at the very first meeting talked about the startup where it is all about comparing people's data? It was something like Patients Like Me.
Cure Together. Cure Together and Patients Like Me.
Cure Together.
They're great.
I think Cure Together is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It is. Y'all know Cure Together? Correct me if I'm wrong. let me see if I can.
I can do it if
Good.
you can't.
You do it.
Yeah, so Care Together, it's a website where you register and then you say that you have some kind of medical problem, like say you have sleep problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then once you've said you have that problem, then you can say, well, what symptoms do I have? And you can list them out and rank their severity, and then you can say, well, what treatments have I tried,
Right.
and how effective
Right.
were each of those?
Right.
And then it will show you all the data it's collected, and it'll show you, like, you know, of all the people who have this sleep apnea problem, here's all the things they did, and you know, the one at the top here with 58% effectiveness is this,
Right.
and you haven't even tried it. Maybe you should try it.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And actually, I did use that. I was having mid-afternoon naps that I suspected was related to not getting enough sleep, and I went to Cure Together, and I said I'm having trouble sleeping, and the number 3 thing on the list of things people had tried was making the room perfectly black at night. My room is not anywhere near black. There's a street light that shines right in the room, so I was like, oh, okay. So I wore an eye mask, problem solved, completely gone. I was like, oh, miracle, miracle.
I changed the topic a little bit, but I want to ask you, what's wrong with afternoon naps? Why do you see afternoon naps as a problem? And this
they
is one of
aren't
the things that's
actually-
really interesting to
they
me.
aren't actually
Why
a
are
problem.
these problems?
Yeah,
You
they
know?
aren't
Public
actually a problem
cancer.
for me. My lifestyle is very forgiving.
There are real problems.
Yeah, no, I don't doubt that. I don't doubt
Yeah.
that. I don't doubt that. But afternoon naps, as
Not
an
a real
afternoon
problem,
napper, doesn't seem to me to be a problem. But then, because I have a job as a professor and I can actually close my door and get up my yoga mat and have an afternoon nap and pretend I'm not there.
I do the same thing at Hack Lab all the time.
Yeah.
But I also feel like I was spending more of my life sleeping than I really wanted to. Like I'd spend 9 hours at night
Yeah.
in bed, and then I'd have a 2-hour
Yeah.
nap, and I'm like, that's 11 hours a day. Like I gotta be able to do better than this somehow.
Yeah.
But a lot more dangerous on the 401.
Yeah. Well, I want to say one other thing actually that was really important. That was really one of the things that I actually really learned from this that wasn't just my own position and my own way of seeing the world. I think is the value of a mirror. Is the value of putting it out so you can watch it. And I thought that was really interesting because so much of the surveillance process is about alienation. It's about taking social activities and putting them on paper, putting them in a model so you can play with the model. The fact that individuals are doing that at an individual level and usefully and effectively, I thought was really quite interesting. And even for myself, the only bit of quantifying myself I've done is, who was it? There's some service where once a month they text you a question 5 times a day and you respond. And
That's a mood tracking thing.
is it? Yes. Yes, this was a mood tracker, but I think they ask other questions too. And just so once a day, 5 times a day, they'd say, "How is your mood?" And it actually really changed my perception of myself, simply to be asked the question once a day. And I'm sure this is nothing new to you, but it really was new to me to realize that I'm actually not a depressed person, that I have bad days, and I can even see them coming, but they're not frequent. They are not frequent at all. On the whole, when you say, "How are you feeling?" it's a 6 out of 10. That's not okay with that. And that really changed my perception of myself. Just that simple act of quantification. So that's what I just want to say that.
I don't know if I can. There's a bit of a theme in some of your observations.
Yes.
Early on, you said about how I'm all nervous now. You said how a lot of it was about wellness and about fitting in and about being a better employee, about incurring less costs for your employer but being more productive. And then later on you mentioned how it's kind of a lack of perspective on it's very much oneself, one small group of friends, but not extrapolating towards the population, and a lack of understanding of statistics and the power that those tools can give us. Is that because there's a lack of understanding of those tools? Because statistics is quite fascinating. I'll mark my card. I don't understand. I remember I've done a lot of statistics, but I'm not a statistician, and I enjoy it. Or is it because there's a very particular demographic profile of the individual involved? And I'm going to like go out on a limb, but I'm going to say that male between 22 and 38, moderately healthy, well-educated. So we maybe life experiences haven't taken us to the point where we see that these things, other things actually happen to everybody.
Right. Right. Yeah. Certainly that kind of demographic thing was I think a real part of it. And so I'd be curious to see if that was just this particular meetup at this particular conference, or it does the movement, does this practice, this quantified self-practice, extend beyond that particular demographic? And if so, why is it so attractive? Why is it so attractive to those kinds of people? And what would happen if it were available and accessible to, in an easy way to people who didn't really want to hack, didn't really care about data that much, didn't really get into, hacking numbers, but could still use the tools somehow.
There was a study about a month or two ago that came out. I forget what the source was. I'll look it up later. But it said that it found that 1 in 4 internet users had actually practiced some sort of quantified self-checkup, tracking one of like sleep cycle or mood or like 1 or 2 other like key metrics. So it's a fairly popular thing to do, and I even have friends that are not techies at all, but they track their sleep cycle and stuff like that. But they don't know that this is part of a larger movement.
Right.
For them, it's just like, oh, I want to sleep less.
Right.
So I think it is more popular than just like this room in all of Toronto. It's just people aren't aware that this is part of a grander theme right now.
It's also really hot right now. I mean, I don't think it's just because I heard about it, so I hear it everywhere now. But I'll warn you, more people like me are coming who are really interested in this, from academia and research, and from Intel and from large, those kind of people are
Phillips had a
very
big
interested
booth
in
at
this.
the Quantified Self conference.
Unilever too.
Yeah. I also just want to follow up on that a little bit. Certainly the practice of keeping a journal, the practice of self-reflection is really quite common, and to actually harken back, to watch yourself in various ways. So I kept wanting to ask the question, because people would say, now I know that I'm not walking my dog enough. And it was like, can't you just tell that you're not walking your dog enough? But you just feel like you should walk your dog. And you don't. You don't. I mean, it's actually true. You don't. And so there's this authority of the number going on that's really very, very interesting. This aha. The other thing I found really interesting, and you can perhaps tell me more about this, as though knowing that you don't walk the dog enough is enough. Well, knowing that you don't walk the dog enough, that'll get you off the sofa, that simply having it before you will, or knowing that you smoke too many cigarettes, that's going to make you stop, knowing that you drink too much, does that make you stop? Help you stop? I don't know.
The feedback is the hardest part of quantified self. I totally think, behavior change. That was one of the sessions I went to, behavior change. Anyway, thank you very much. That was great.
All right, thanks.